I have painted and sold over 600 of these mini crazy floral bouquet paintings, and I'm so excited to do a vlog for all of you so I can show you the behind the scenes of how I go about creating these pieces. And before we get started, I just want to talk about how it is so incredibly important to develop a process that is unique to you as an artist. This actually starts by paying closer attention to those elements and those things within art that really come alive for you. So the next time that you're looking at art and you see something that you really absolutely love, I want you to stop and really notice, what is it about that painting that you really love? Is it the color that the artist is using? Is it the way that the artist captures light and dark? Is it the capacity for creating something that looks three-dimensional? Is it a feeling that you love about it? Is it the calmness of the painting? Really start to notice those elements that you feel most drawn to as an artist, and then try to incorporate some of those elements yourself. I believe that it's so incredibly important for every artist to find their own unique expression and their creative voice. And so when I was developing the process for these paintings, I did just that. I went deeper into texture, which is one of my all-time favorite art elements, but color is obviously my first love, and I also love exploring shape. So if you haven't watched my previous video where I go into why these paintings are so highly collectible, I recommend that you go back and watch that video first, and then you can come see my process for creating these paintings. And I am going to also leave the link to my Etsy shop in the caption of this video so that you can go check out my Etsy store. And for those of you who need proof that I've actually sold 600 of these pieces, you can go check that out as well. So when I started actually developing the process for these paintings, I found a way that I personally love to work. Now, just because I love to work this way doesn't mean that it's for everyone, right? And I encourage you to find what you are passionate about. But for me, as someone who likes to go with the flow and create something a little bit more abstract and impressionistic, for me, I love taking the abstract and turning it into something else. And so over the process of the last 10 years, I have really found those ways to paint and express myself that I truly love. And so what I found is that if I start with shapes, and when I say shapes, I just mean abstract shapes, and then I add layers to that and turn it into a floral painting, that I really enjoy that process. I like it because it feels fresh and it feels new and yet still abstract, but there still is some order in it, right? And so when I am starting my paintings, before I ever add any palette knife work and oil paint, I like to start with acrylics. And I like painting a whole bunch of abstract shapes on my boards so that it looks a little bit like this. So this is a background that is started, that I will then take this abstract background and turn it into one of my crazy floral bouquet paintings. Now, let's talk substrates, because not all substrates are created equally. And each substrate that you choose, you should choose wisely to actually match the type of art that you're wanting to create. And so while I could actually choose to paint this on a canvas, I prefer to work on a cradled artboard. And the reason for that is because I like something a little bit more sturdy to actually hold the texture of the oil paint. Another reason I like working on a cradled artboard is because I really get annoyed when canvases warp. And I'm not talking about the actual canvas itself, I'm talking about the frame and the wood of the canvas. I have just gotten so frustrated over the years with painting out a canvas and then later having the wood frame warp and feeling like the painting is lost because the wood is warped. So these are the artboards that I prefer using. I order them from Blick online. We don't have one here in my city, and so I just order them online. I order them in bulk and I order them in groups of 10 because I like to work on a collection of 10 paintings at a time. And that is probably one of the number one tips that I can give for working artists, is that you should always be doing more than one painting at the same time. It actually saves you so much time in the long run. And it helps because if you're going to put out a collection of art, collectors like to see similar pieces grouped together. So like I said, I like to paint the backgrounds first, and I already showed you what one of them looked like. And for me, I like to paint with acrylics first. I don't like ending my paintings with acrylics because I love the feel and the luminosity of oil paint. But in order to save myself time, I do all of the underpainting in acrylic paint. Otherwise, for how many layers I'm putting of shapes on my backgrounds, it probably would take me months to paint just one painting. I have a very specific order, which sounds sort of silly, in which I like to paint my colors on my artboards. And one more thing before we actually get started, I have a whole entire course where I go even more in detail on this whole entire process, and it's actually called Crazy Floral Bouquet. And if you want to learn more about this process and how I go about creating these paintings, I will leave the link in the description. So I'm just finishing up adding all of my abstract paint to my boards. I always end up working on the floor, as you can see, but I just want to say that I always feel like this is almost like the ugly stage when it comes to my paintings. I don't really like these pieces when they're at this point, but this is really just almost like the diamond in the rough, right? And I love taking all of these abstract shapes and turning it into an actual floral. And I just want to mention that I do have this larger board right here. And this is kind of what I like to do when I want to work on some larger pieces. And so at any given moment, where I have a whole bunch of extra paint over here on my palette, I will go ahead and just block in some shapes on a larger board. And then this piece will then also get oil paint over the top of it. But yeah, this is sort of the ugly phase. I would never just leave the paintings like this. But what I'm really looking for at this moment in time is, do I have all of the color that I want to, pull from for this stage? And so if I feel like it just needs a little bit more balance, either with some warms or some cools or some lighter tones or some darker tones, then I will go ahead and add that in at this point in time. Now, I just want to say that, even though it's very similar what I do in terms of the colors that I'm adding, what's really funny is that no, set of minis are exactly the same. And so even though I'm adding some of the same colors that I normally use, the way that the color goes onto the boards, it makes it so that each group is somewhat unique in and of themselves. So I think these ones are pretty much done. I just finished with greens, and I might just go ahead and pull some pinks back in if I feel like I lost too much of the pink at this stage. So we will see. I'm going to let this last layer dry, and then I'm going to start deciding if there's any last colors I want to add in. And then my next step is actually to wire the back of these boards. I always make an effort to wire the back of my artboard so that they are ready to hang on the wall for all of my collectors. It's a very simple process, and all you need is some D-rings. I just get mine on Amazon, and some wire and a really good high quality drill, and you're all set to go, and your paintings are ready to hang. So I have now finished the backgrounds for all 10 of my 8x8 cradled artboards. And again, remember, I am just painting abstract shapes in fairly bright colors, and I'm going to essentially turn this into an abstract floral. And for whatever reason, I just find that working from more of an abstract painting and turning it into a floral painting. It just is fun to me. I like the process of creating it in this way. And so it's taken me quite a few years to really perfect my process of how I make these paintings. And I feel like it's constantly evolving and changing. But anyways, at this stage, I always like to wire the back of all of my boards. And this is for several reasons. First of all, I don't do it in the beginning because I actually like to, really study where all of the shapes are to figure out, okay, I want to put my vase here and I'm going to turn this into a flower and, whatever. So I like to study each individual composition. So I kind of wait to wire the boards until after I have all the backgrounds done. But also, it's really important to have the wire on the back of the board before I even start with the oil paint, because oil paint takes about, 2 to 3 weeks to dry. And what I like to do, and this is just the process that I have found personally that works for me, and that is I like to do acrylic paint on the sides so that I'm not getting any oil paint on my wall. But also, when I put the oil paint down and then hang it on the wall, that's where it's going to dry. And this way, I can save space because I don't have a large enough surface or a table or a shelf where I can just, put all of my paintings that are drying, okay? So I have just found that that it really works well to hang my oil paintings on the wall while I'm waiting for them to dry. And then 2, to make sure that I only do acrylics on the sides, because if I had oil paint right up to the edge of my board and I was trying to hang it on the wall, it would be a huge mess, right? And so I have just learned I never really oil paint on the sides of my boards or my canvases. And then I just do it on the top and then I hang it on the wall to dry. Okay, so let's get into oil paint and why I have chosen to use oil paint. I feel like personally, it took me a really long time to even be brave enough to venture into oil paint. And that was because, for one, I didn't know anything about it. And I had had multiple people telling me, oh, you don't want to use oils. They're so, messy and the fumes are annoying and, all the things that most people have as a preconceived idea about oil paint. And so one of the reasons why I, ended up venturing into using oil paint was I was feeling really frustrated by acrylic paint. And so anytime I was painting anything, actually, I was so incredibly frustrated because I felt like I was having to do like 10 to 20 layers of acrylic paint just to get the look that I was wanting to accomplish. And so it was taking me hours to get anywhere with my acrylic paintings. And one of the reasons why is because basically because acrylic paint dries so quickly, you don't have very much time to blend or move the paint. And I didn't know anything about oils, and I didn't know how amazing they were. And so I had been painting for a while, and one of my friends who is an artist, I showed her some of my work, and she asked, and she said, "Are you using oil paint?" And I said, "No, I'm not." And she said, "Well, I think that you actually look like you're kind of using oil paint. And I think that by looking at the type of work that you're making, that you might actually enjoy oil paint." And honestly, I discounted that, and I thought, oh no, I'm not gonna go down that road. But really, after thinking through it, I just took the leap into painting with oils. And honestly, I've never looked back, and I've never actually regretted it. I personally feel like oil paint is amazing for several different reasons. I love it because, one, the luminosity of the color and just the sheen of oil paint. If you've never experienced it in person, I highly recommend it. It's almost like your painting becomes like living and breathing. It's that amazing. And it really does make such a difference. So I think that's a different color than this one. I don't know. Anyways, it gives it this living, breathing quality to it. And then the other thing that I never realized, and this was right around the time when I was still discovering my style, and I had always loved texture in my work, and I wanted to explore texture a lot more. And I don't know about you guys, but for me, for using acrylic paint for texture, I have never found a medium or an add-in that I particularly like when it comes to painting with acrylics. I feel like it's just lacking, and anytime I use something, and maybe I just didn't search long enough, but I just always felt like it was almost plasticky when it comes to building texture. And sorry, I'm putting all my paint away. I have all of my warm colors now. These are all my favorite colors. But anyways, when I was finding my style, one of the things that I discovered about my style is that I absolutely love exploring texture. And I had no idea that oil paint even really of what you could do with oil paint in terms of texture, that literally all I do is use oil paint with my palette knife straight out of the tube. And that's it, you guys. Sometimes if I'm gonna add anything into my oil paint for my palette knife work, I will mix in some cold wax medium, but for the most part, I only use just oil paint straight out of the tube. And I don't know of any other paint that gives you such amazing texture without having to add something into it. And I have used heavy body acrylics, and it's just not the same by any capacity. Okay, so my palette is pretty much full here. I have a feeling that I'm gonna have a difficult time with some of these greens because I use a lot of green in my paintings, and I'm kind of running low on some of these colors over here, but it's all good. So I am just going to be painting one of these pieces for all of you. And I just want to, continue to emphasize that a lot of times artists stay away from oil paint because they think it's going to be some really difficult thing to be able to use oil paint. But there's a few things that I have learned over the years in order to allow oil paint to not be so difficult, right? I rarely use brushes, honestly. And the only time I use brushes is when I'm doing a much more like blended brush stroke type of look in my work. But a lot of times artists are annoyed because the oil paint will stay in your brush unless you clean it really well. And so, it's not like you can't just like wash your brush in water. You have to use something like either a Gamsol to clean your brushes, or the other thing that I just recently learned is you can just clean your brushes with olive oil as well. But see how I'm just adding some Gamsol onto a wet wipe, and I'm getting all of that paint off of my brush. So it's not as, difficult as you might think it would be. And you just want to clean your brushes when you're done with them. And then if there's any like dried paint still in it, when you come back to your brushes, you can still get it out, which is kind of bonkers to me. That would not be the case if I had leftover acrylic paint in my brush. It's a totally different story. You can usually get it out. And see, this brush is all soft again, and it didn't even have that much oil paint in it, but it's completely soft and ready to go again. Now, the other thing that I swear by when it comes to creating oil paintings, and that is having baby wipes or just some sort of cloth nearby. Now, I have spent a lot of my life, I used to buy the baby wipes from Costco, and those work amazingly to clean your brushes on. So there's kind of a time hack for you. You don't even need a solvent. You can just clean your brushes on baby wipes, or what we have started purchasing for our household are just like basically baby wipes without anything in them. They're just like dry. And so I can, still use them to clean my palette knife and or my brushes. And if there's something dried on there, then I will get some Gamsol onto the baby wipe. But this is just a dry baby wipe. It has no like liquid, it's not wet, it doesn't have anything on it. So, and I even think you could probably, you can put linseed oil on it, and that would make it even easier to clean your brushes or your palette knife. But what you're going to want to do is have something really close to the paint to your palette knife to clean your palette knife in between colors and to get it really clean. Okay, so this is my favorite palette knife right now, but I also got these really cool ones from one of my students, and I've never used them, and it was so sweet. She sent it to me in the mail. She sent me a whole bunch. Thanks, Suze, you're amazing. Anyways, I haven't tried them yet, so I thought maybe I would try them, but it's so different because you just hold on to this little metal end right here. So I kind of want to try those. They seem like they're very high quality. So I have my palette set up now. And now we're going to start playing with the composition on our boards. So one of the first things that I have to decide is where I'm going to put my vase, and then how am I going to start building my flowers. So I have discovered over the last few years, and do I want to do this one? Maybe I want to do this one. I don't know. Which one do I feel the most inspired by? So one of the things that I look for when I'm trying to find my composition is I like to sort of block in my vase and sort of see where I can start building my palette knife to create some flowers. So I like using a weird arrangement of color in the vase so that there's kind of like unexpected colors. So if there's like pink or something like that in there, I really like it. I like this yellow color as well. So what I have is an acrylic marker. This is a Thule Art acrylic paint marker. And the most important piece is to get the lines of my vase correct so that it doesn't look super wonky, okay? And this is one of the things that I discovered in terms of composition, that it's really important to, creating something that still has really clean lines. So I like using my square here to make sure that my lines are level and I have a straight vase. So I kind of do like this, and then I just usually freehand the bottom here like that. And that's pretty much all I do with the acrylic markers. Sometimes I will also come in and draw some of the stems as well ahead of time. Now you'll see, because once I start adding the oil paint, I'm also going to add some more stems coming down with my oil paint as well. But you could use any kind of acrylic marker, and this is just helping me get the composition sort of like mapped out. It doesn't need to be perfect. But then the other thing that sometimes I do is I might just go ahead and also draw a line for the tabletop as well. So I might do something like that. So now we get to do all the fun part, right? Up until this point, I don't necessarily love painting the backgrounds. It's not like my favorite part of building these paintings. But really quickly, before we start in on our palette knife work, I just want to say that once you start painting with oils, you cannot go back to acrylics. So everything that I'm going to use in terms of mixed media, acrylic paint, acrylic markers, it all needs to be done as soon as I start adding my oil paint. So that's just a side note. And then all I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start studying the shapes that I already see on my board. And this is the part that just makes me so happy and that I just love playing with. And that is to really just turn some of these shapes into actual flowers. And so I basically just start studying my canvas here, and I just start building with even more shapes. And if there's anything that, like this green, I want to have the flower go actually larger, then I'm just going to edit out this green and just add oil paint right over the top, right? And what's so awesome is that you can blend into each other, right? So, you know, if I wanted to have a little bit of pink blended into this color, I can do that. And let's see. Let's say I want a petal coming over here, and I can kind of blend them together. So that this is just a matter of kind of studying my composition and deciding where I want to place interlocking shapes. And this is a very abstract way of painting, and it's not going to work for everyone, okay? If you are more of a planner in terms of your composition style, this type of composition and this type of process would probably give you a serious panic attack, because as an artist, you most likely just work so much better with painting from a reference photo. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just is your personal preference when it comes to process. And so oftentimes I tell my students that I personally believe that usually, and it's not always the case, but what I have discovered over the years is that there really are kind of two kinds of artists. There are the people who just like to sit down and paint very intuitively, and they are almost like a go with the flow type of person when it comes to their process. And so for them, like actually having a plan and saying, okay, I am going to paint this reference photo and I am going to, you know, make it look like a specific flower, you know, or you're working strictly from a reference photo. This type of painting, like just intuitively, like really stresses you out, because you need to have a plan for where you're going. And it's really hard for you to just like paint something straight out of your head. And that actually used to be how I was before my car accident. And now I like working in this very informal way. And I feel like every time I sit down to paint one of these paintings, I'm never really sure what is going to come out, right? So I really don't have necessarily a plan. I'm letting the abstract shapes that are already on the board sort of inform my decisions and my composition. And so, like, each like I can almost start seeing some of the shapes that I have here turning into flowers as I go, right? So here's this red flower over here, and I might just add a shape on top so that it kind of gives dimension to it. And so it's almost like the painting is like talking to me and telling me where to go and what to do. And that is how I like to paint. And yet, one of the things that I've learned over the years in working with lots of students is that some artists that like working like this would give them almost like a panic attack, because they can't just do something like this without having a plan first. So this is kind of out of their comfort zone, and they have to mostly work from a photo reference. So knowing, and then there are those, and I forgot to mention this, there are artists who are kind of a little bit of both. And, I think the longer that I've been doing this, the more that I can kind of go back and forth between the two types, right? I can also have a plan for my paintings, and I can follow, a reference photo and make it more stylized and still come up with a composition that I like by working from a reference photo. But I usually always end up somewhat abstracted. So if this makes you nervous, because you're like, is she looking at a flower? What is going on? Then most likely you are a planner. So what I like to do at this stage, because I kind of have an idea of, okay, this is where my flowers are kind of beginning to emerge. I'm seeing like the shape of the composition. Now it's kind of going to be the part where I start adding in some of the background. And this actually is kind of one of my favorite parts, because it's almost like taking something away makes for everything else to pop out even more. And so this is like one of my favorite parts. And so what I like to do at this stage is I really study the colors of my flower and my composition, and I look and I say, okay, what color should I make the background in order to really get everything to almost like pop even more in terms of colors? Because I love contrast. That's one of the things that I've learned how to embrace about myself as an artist. I prefer to have like my flowers should be contrasting with the background color. And so for me, I have to like really plan out, okay, what background color will work? Sometimes it's a color that I already have in the background, or sometimes it's just something completely different. And so I haven't really decided what color I want to use. And the other thing that kind of goes into my thinking behind that as well is what what colors do I have a lot of right now? So some of my colors, I don't have enough of it to actually create a color background. So I am thinking through, I did watch a movie this week, and I often find inspiration for whatever colors I'm being drawn to from actual, you know, I don't know, like from vintage elements. And so I was watching Call the Midwife, which I don't usually watch very much, but there was this really beautiful blue-green color, and I want to see if I can somewhat match it. I think it was something like this, and it was just really a lovely color. So that's, I think, what I might go with. And so when I am doing this part, it's a lot of it is about like really capitalizing on the shapes. And this technique is actually something that I'm not sure if I'm the first. I know I'm not the first person who's done this technique, but I don't know if I just made up this term or if it's a real thing, but this is what I like to call masking. And I'm pretty sure I didn't come up with it. I'm pretty sure it's been out there for a while. But what masking does is it removes the background to kind of mask that layer out. Maybe it's a term taken from Photoshop. I don't know if that's where I picked it up or what. So I like this color. And like I said, I find inspiration often from vintage color palettes. So I am just going to go ahead and really block in the background of my painting, and then I'm probably going to add something to the tabletop, and I will let you guys watch, and then I'll come back and let you know what I did. So, as you are developing your own process as an artist, I invite you to ask yourself these questions. Do I enjoy working from a reference photo? Do I want my paintings to be impressionistic, abstract, or representational? Do I want the form to be the most important part? And that's just the three-dimensional capacity. If you enjoy more representational art with even a touch of form, you need to make sure that you start with line work and that your lines are exact. If your work is more abstract, then it's important to have a good sense of what feeling it is that you want to convey through your art. In fact, that's probably one of the best questions that you can ask yourself about your art. How do you want it to feel? What emotions do you want it to express? How can you explore a process that communicates that feeling? Sometimes finding your own style is a process of elimination. If you haven't found your thing, just keep trying. Try a lot of different processes. Learn from a lot of different artists. And if you don't enjoy a process, move along and try something else. Don't take it personally. It really does help to know what art element is driving your style. There are 7 elements of art: line, shape, color, form, value, texture, and space. And my guess is that you probably have a number 1 element of art, and that element should drive your whole entire process. I actually have a quiz to help you find your top element of art. The link is in the caption. And then once you know what your driving element of art is, you can find a process that actually centers around that one element of art. Have you guessed my top element of art yet? Mine is most definitely color. My whole entire process, including my inspiration, always begins with color. And my secondary elements of art are texture and shape. And I love exploring all of those elements in these pieces of art. But I also just want to encourage you, because it really took me a very long time to find a process that I thoroughly enjoyed. And I had to develop my own. I had to do my own thing, and I had to figure out those parts of me that I most deeply wanted to express. And if you made it this far and you want to learn my process, I have a discount code for you to take my course, Crazy Floral Bouquet, for 30% off with coupon code YouTube. So I am really just tweaking all of the shapes in this piece to actually finish it up, but it's really, really close to being done. And I just want to mention really quickly before I continue working on the rest of my pieces, which I will show you. I probably won't show you every single one, but I'll show you how they all turned out. One of the things that I just want to mention is that this process is not going to be for everyone. And the reason for that is because not everyone feels drawn to the 7 different elements of art in the same exact way. And so for you, this process might not be a good fit for you because maybe you don't like this bright of color, right? Maybe you like a much more neutral color palette. And so this type of painting is like so bright that it's like offensive to you, right? Or maybe you prefer something that doesn't have such, how do I want to say this? Maybe you prefer something that is a lot more representational, and you want your pieces to actually look three-dimensional in form, right? So for me, I don't like painting in form. And while I appreciate it, and I think it's amazing when people, paint in three-dimensional form, I actually hate painting in that way. Although I have done a few, different, I've done quite a bit of work that is more realistic looking, right? But it's just not my preferred way to express myself. And so some people would look at this and just go, I don't get it, right? Because that's not what they feel, how they feel drawn to express themselves as an artist. And I think that is the beauty of art, is that there's so many different ways to express your style and to really express yourself as a creative, that there is no right or wrong way, right? And I have always been drawn to graphic shape. And that's why I think I love this way of creating, because it's not about having it look like a realistic floral bouquet. It's just, that's not the point of my piece. If I wanted it to be that way, I would do something closer to that. So I guess what I'm saying is, when you really look at what type of art you feel the most drawn to, it's important for you to delineate between what elements of art you love expressing in your creative style. And there's no right or wrong answer. So, for some people, they like things that look like lines that are like super, super wonky. And, they don't want their art to look realistic. Like I think of things like, the way that Picasso painted his, crazy faces and like crazy shapes and stuff like that. Like that was definitely not representational, and it was so out of the box, right? And so you have to decide how it is, like what your style is and how you prefer to express all of the different elements of art. And you can't have all of it all the time, right? And so, yeah, I enjoy working with shape in this way, with color and texture. And I just love the process of creating these palette knife paintings. And I have worked really hard to perfect the process. And who knows, maybe in a few years it will evolve and change. I've been diving more into actually value lately, which doesn't have so much like graphic bold shapes, but where there's like more blending between the colors. And in doing it that way, I have been pulling back some of the texture because I'm focused more on value in those pieces. And if you go watch my video where I talk about how my style is shifting, some of my newer work is not using texture quite as much, but it's more going into blending between values. So, like I said, there's no right or wrong way. There's just different ways of expressing your own unique creative voice. So I feel like this piece is finished, and I am going to hang this one on the wall, and I'll show you what all of the paintings look like when I am done.